Hello and welcome to the Deep State Consciousness podcast. Today I'm joined by Thomas Howell, also known as Ishtar Ishaya. Thomas is an American living in Japan and a teacher of something called Ascension Meditation, which, if I read it out, is a meditative technique that utilizes praise, gratitude and love, and rather than seeking to control or discipline the mind, it charms the mind. So, Thomas, good morning and good afternoon, where you are in Japan.
Good afternoon, Richard.
So, charming as opposed to disciplining, that sounds great to me, exactly what people will be looking for. So really keen to hear about that. But before you do, take us back to how this started for you. I know from reading a bit of your biography, you recognize now that you were having spiritual experiences at a very young age. So perhaps you could tell us a bit about that.
Sure, absolutely. Like a lot of people, well, I'll just say a lot of the things sort of started in the crib. But of course, I didn't, like any child, I wasn't thinking of them and putting them in some sort of spiritual context. You know, they were just what was part of life. You know, I didn't know that I wasn't supposed to have memories of those really early times until probably taking a AP psychology class my last year of high school. But even in the crib, there was this sort of sense of silence that essentially permeated everything that I saw. There was a sense of dimensionality about life too, about awareness, which I found very interesting, and I kind of played with it. It felt very much, the regular world often felt a little bit like being immersed in water. You know, when you're at the surface, there's more noise, but you can modulate and you can go down, and the noise of the surface becomes less, and often in that silence the clarity becomes more, and so there was a bit of that coloring just everyday life. Silence, there was a certain sort of white light that seemed to kind of permeate everything. I remember learning how to say I, learning the concept of I, and learning being able to differentiate between objects and the linguistic sort of play that happened there. But it didn't really set in as a sense of maybe hard separation until about 7 or 8 or so, when I thought I really need to sort of commit to that and you know, get me one of those personalities that my mother's talking about and everybody else seems to be talking about, and so I dove in, and we might call that, you know, sort of like the David Foster Wallace article, a supposedly fun thing I'll never do again, or something like that. Wasn't so bad, but
it brings about some problems, yeah.
Yeah, it became problematic very quickly.
Consequences.
Indeed, and by the time I really got it going, there was so much gravity that it was just, oh, okay, I cannot stop this train, and then I just forgot about it, and you know engaged in what most children do, which is growing up and learning about the world, and you know, being very excited about it, and being very excited about getting taller and becoming more capable and learning new intellectual tricks and all of that sort of thing. And
so when you say in the crib, you're talking like below 2 years old.
Then. Yeah, I wasn't able to walk yet. I have a lot of memories that, you know, of course people ought to be very skeptical, you know, that this is something that one should be skeptical about. But I have a lot of memories that happened before first walking and first escaping my crib. Those were two really big events for me. I remember learning to walk and having either my sister or my mother about 3 or 4 feet away, kind of on their knees with their arms open, you know, and here I am, you know, about to get ready to, you know, try to do this thing again, and, you know, just falling and tripping. And I remember the first time that oh my God, you know, that the legs were, I felt so capable. And the same with getting out of my crib. I had tried for, I don't know, a really long time, a lot of unsuccessful escapes. I just didn't have the strength. The socks on my feet would hit the bars and just not get traction. I would fall backwards and just fall asleep, and, you know, sort of decide to try again the next night. And then I remember the first time that I got out and landed on the floor, and then I wasn't able to get back up in, and there was really nothing interesting on the ground. So I was a little bit frustrated for not thinking it through fully. So those were very strong, and a lot of the memories before were this and during, with this sort of big, beautiful sort of sense of presence that was everywhere. I didn't have words for it. I didn't have words for many things. But
Okay, yeah, because for most of us, we can speculate that there must have been a time where I didn't distinguish in my sensory observations between laptop and microphone and cup. There wasn't an I in here that was making that. So I can look now and say, well, yeah, there must have been a time prior to that construct. But for most of us, we don't really have a memory of that time. So it's fascinating for you to go on a spiritual journey with that sense of almost like a remembering of a time when you were more there.
It was very interesting. And I remember, I remember sort of being able to distinguish between objects and know right. what the stove was, and even have words for objects. But neither of those developments seemed to sort of really set in a deeply ingrained sense of being locked in a very small perspective. There was a sense of having a lot of these objects, including myself, including my thinking processes. A lot of these objects were very much experienced from almost a shared flowing state of awareness. My father, my mother, I would be in this sort of singular field and just and kind of feel people out from the inside. So it was a very interesting time of life, and I just didn't make anything of it because that's what was happening and was born into at that time. Yeah.
Okay, I best let you roll on with this biography, because okay. I mean we could be there. That's such a fascinating.
Sorry, yeah.
But, we could go on. Yeah. So please, carry on. You've had this sense of separation then, and the unintended consequences of that, and life's going on. What's coming up for you next?
It built up really quickly. I didn't want to go to school. I didn't want to learn how to read. I didn't want to become numerate either. I enjoyed. For some reason I was stubborn against all of that, and I just really didn't want to go to first grade. And that was probably a good instinct, actually.
Yeah.
I did very well in school, intellectually and that sort of thing. I had very bright parents and a very bright sister, and a really good school, and an aptitude, apparently, after the stubbornness against it, for it. But I also, had a lot of bullying or that sort of thing, because I was a little bit weird and really smart and pretty uninhibited in some ways, and a little over the top in that developing personality. And also apparently I didn't grow up in a very religious or spiritual environment. If my parents were trying to have me become a free thinker, a good rational thinker, but there was definitely a certain amount of a hard-edged atheism that was in there too, especially from my father. And I, being a 7-year-old atheist in 1990 Wisconsin is not necessarily a good thing to, if one wants to be popular with their classmates.
Right. Just feel me. Is Wisconsin one of the more religious states?
No, not really, but sort of in the middle. Sort of in the. It's America, so America's a little bit more religious than a lot of other countries.
Yeah, sure. So when I say one of the more religious states, I forget how religious some of the states are.
It's not Tennessee, it's not Mississippi,
but sufficiently religious to make being a 7-year-old atheist in the 90s difficult.
If you tell somebody consistently that their parents are fools and that they're a fool too, and they should immediately drop their worldview right now, that's without any tact. Yeah. It's never, no matter where you're coming from, it's not good. So that happened, and growing up, and I was learning how to, I wanted to be liked by people. I wanted to be loved and accepted outside of my nuclear family. I wanted so much to be embraced by the outer world, and that took up a lot of my attention, like so many preteens and teenagers. And by about 13, I think I was starting to get a little bit good at it, which in some ways was detrimental, because a lot of it came through pretense and acting. And I remember coming home one time telling my sister, who also didn't necessarily have the greatest time in school, I've got it, this is what I'm going to do. I can read everybody, and I know what they instinctively want, and I will project that to them, and I can do this to everybody, and I'll have a great time. And she said, that's not a good idea. You're going to end up losing yourself. And I said, no, I'll keep track of it. No problem. I've got it. And then I remember about a year later coming back into her room, as I often did for counseling. And because my parents had told me a piece of advice, just be yourself. And I had absolutely no idea what the hell that meant. Which one would have been the question. And so that really became a big development of those years. And then when I was 13, then it all kind of was torn off rather quickly. I was in a car accident with my mother, and she passed away. And that was an interesting event. I had precognitive flashes in my life, usually about mundane things or about raffles that I should enter, or little things like that. And then one night, after I had actually broken my arm that night playing baseball, getting hit by a pitch, and that was my big dilemma. But one night, as I was about to go to bed and talking with my mother, it just flashed over me that she was going to die soon, and I had never had that sort of thought before. So I asked her about it, and it kind of stunned her a little bit. Maybe there was a little bit of juice coming through the expression. And then she kind of quickly said, no, I'll be around for a while, I'll be around for you to grow up and all that sort of thing. And that pacified me. And then I went to bed. The next morning I woke up like people do in cartoons or movies, where you just kind of just go 90 degrees and get up. I woke up gasping. And just as my mother and father were outside my bedroom door, gasping as if I had just run into my body, and there were already words coming out of my mouth. I've got something I've got to tell you. I've got something I've got to tell you. And then I couldn't find the message. It was as if I ran too quickly, and I just left it somewhere. And I was so frustrated because I didn't know what it was. And they calmed me down again. They went off on their morning walk, and I got myself ready to go to school. I went to school, had a day of it, came home. My mother and I went and dropped my sister off at her new place of work. We pulled out, and boom, we were hit by a big speeding Lincoln Town car. And neither of us saw it coming. It was just at the moment the decision was made, it was hidden behind another car that was going the speed limit that didn't hit us, but just one of those situations. And looking over, just about to start a conversation with my mother, to my left, there is this big gray Lincoln. It's close enough I could see that it was a Lincoln, just right there, right outside the door, basically. And so, there was nothing I could do. And nature kind of took over, as it were. I had time to think a couple thoughts. The first one was shit. But instead of tensing up, there was complete relaxation that followed. The second thought was a little bit more reflective. I thought, I really thought this one was going to go more than 13 years. It's just this, I really thought this one had the script was longer. And after that, the whole life flashing before the eye things happened. I didn't think it was possible. I'd certainly read about it before and thought, well, how could that be? How could that sort of experience be actual? But it was every single perception, every instance in my life, it went backwards on me. Every instance of my life was experienced in full, including all of my perceptions about it, including the ones I was only vaguely conscious of. The whole sort of terroir of the experience was just digested. And along with that, there was almost a sense of being guided through the process, by, I might have called it an omniscient aspect of awareness, that I had experienced before in my life, but often when I would come close to it, I would push it away. Right. Because it was usually, it would often be kind of raining on my parade.
Okay. Yeah.
But here I was just absolutely sinking, relaxed into this field suppose, omniscience and love and forgiveness. And every time that I had lied, every time that I had been afraid, every time that I had put up, some kind of resistance against this, sort of fundamental field of love and awareness, it was experienced, seen for what it was, and then forgiven. And it was just, the whole process felt like having an invisible skin just pulled off of me with each step. And by the time that the whole life was over, it was as if the whole life stream was taken back into this fundamental basic ocean. And there, with my eyes open, still looking at this car and still seeing my mother and still seeing the sky over here, seeing the whole scene, everything just seemed to be made up of this one fundamental place. The difference between interior and exterior was just perceptually gone. There was a sense that everything is in perfect order, that there was even this sort of light that seemed to be underneath everything, and everything seemed to be made of love. I suppose I was just ready to go. And, instead of having to die and go to some kingdom of heaven, it was more like the veils for me, that the veils that had been obscuring its presence right here and right now were just taken out. And there I was. And then boom, the car hit us, and it was pretty bad. We traveled a long way. I could see the skid marks on the road for years afterwards. And in a sort of macabre sense, I would point out to friends, "Hey, see that right there?" And it was a common road that I would drive on. So it was there for me, like, every day, this sort of reminder.
Yeah.
And so I came to with the sound of the seatbelt noise going off, and my mother's really labored breathing, and the emergency staff, they were having to get out their big, like, skill saws, their jaws of life or whatever they use. They were cutting into the car, and I heard all of that noise, and we were taken out of the car and, put on a stretcher. They thought, getting my neck down, they thought I might have some spinal injury. I turned out to have, I already had a broken arm, which we were actually, funnily enough, heading to the same hospital to put a cast on it. So I ended up at the hospital anyways. And I broke my middle finger. So I ended up walking around for half of the summer with a cast that had my finger up like this. So that was kind of a funny thing. But in the ambulance, there was still this sense of being in that space, of everything, the people working on me, my mother, everything sort of existing in that space. It was, at first I was also concussed. So I couldn't remember my name. I could only tell the EMTs that's my mother over there, but I don't know what my name is. But I do know that's my mother, and that sort of thing. And then she called out to me twice, called my name, and the second time she called my name, it really sort of registered, and I replied twice that "I'm okay, Mom. I'm okay, Mom," and with the second reply, I just felt her go. Her breathing changed from this sort of really, really intense hyperventilation, trying to keep inside a broken body, to really slow, calm breaths, that were just getting longer as with each one. And in that state, a lot of people speak about maybe having sometimes dual awareness when they're in that sort of situation. I had kind of an experience of being down in my body, looking out, through at the EMTs asking me questions and working on the both of us. But at the same time, my awareness felt like it was anywhere I wanted to put it, floating on top of the ambulance, looking down, being inside everybody, being even connected with my mother. So when she asked the questions of me, instead of just, having it feel like an audio signal has come in and now my brain's interpreting it, it was as if it was happening within my awareness, and I could feel her. I just figured that was, what happens when people are concussed. And so when she registered that I was okay, I just felt her go. I didn't put it together that she was leaving her body, but it was just a sense, a real palpable sense in me that, okay, she's done her work and she's going. And then we ended up, and I found out that she passed away in the hospital. And that was really, really terrible and hard. And because she was one of the closest person to me in the world.
Yeah, sure.
In many ways. And so this, the grief played out just like Elizabeth Kubler-Ross would even write it up, and in that order over the next few months, years even. But at the same time, in the immediate aftermath, there was a sense of that presence that was there. And after a little bit, I figured, okay, this, and doing a little bit of reading, this does not seem like a concussion here, or I started thinking everyone should have such a concussion, and there was this sense of joy and bliss. There was this whole other dimension, internal dimension that I had been largely ignoring for the past 7 years or even longer. And
did you relate it at the time to what you were experiencing as a very, very young child? That sense.
Sometimes, yes, yeah. Not wholly. I wasn't that clever. But certain aspects of it were just so similar to the kind of bliss. When I was as a child, I would play with that field. I would, as a sort of, go into it, and then when I would go into it, there would be this sense of joy and bliss that would come out of it and sort of infuse my being, infuse my body, and that came back, and that I remembered. That was the same thing. So that piqued my interest, and the fact
it must have changed your relationship to the grief to some degree. But also I wonder about the precognitive experience. I wonder if that came back to haunt you at all, that you kind of, how you felt about that afterwards.
Yeah, eventually, after a while, it did. But that was after sort of the presence had subsided, and I was just left with being a regular old individualized self again. And then, anything could cause me suffering at that point. And I didn't hold it against myself too much, because I felt, I guess in some ways I did my due diligence in a way, and I cut myself a lot of slack, because I figured, like, I'm 13 here. How do I know these things just happen? And, it's not something that we're exactly trained to cultivate in the society, so I couldn't be too mad. But, I would, after the presence subsided, which was after a few months, I would wake up every morning crying. I would wake up every morning crying, because I would go to bed with the deep hope that in the morning I would wake up and none of this would have happened. I really, even though rationally I felt this wasn't possible, at the other, it was my biggest desire that this would be over, that this was just a nightmare. And so that would be part of that. Those morning crying sessions was, these things did happen. And even with some precognition, it wasn't enough to sort of, put me in the life that I really at the time thought I ought to be in, instead of the one that I was in without a mother.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, but that it was interesting in that period right after. It was I usually describe it as kind of having this river of grief and anger and all the other things that are part of it flowing, but at the same time, it was as if I was in this cave behind this waterfall of emotions, and I had this beautiful silence, and it seemed to go back forever and ever and ever, and I could go as far back into it as I wanted, and it didn't go anywhere. It was there, I couldn't get away from it. I would even try to see if I could go back to how I was before, and I just couldn't do it. I would start laughing. I would try to lie to somebody, some subtle lie of pretense to get what I wanted, to please someone, but I just couldn't do it at the time. And to me, that was wonderful. I made the decision, though, not to really tell anybody about it.
Okay.
I wanted to once, because my dear father, he was, of course, perhaps even more than us kids, my sister and I, it was so hard for him, the hardest thing. And I so wanted him to have access to some of those weird that weird bliss joy thing that was there. But I would, at first I sort of looked out and tried to see signs that people might be sort of having that experience, but I didn't see any. And a couple times I even started a sentence like, "Hey, are you?" And then I just, never mind, you know. I kind of wanted to be, there was a sense that I wanted to be careful about sharing this dimension, because I wanted to be able to cultivate it and explore it without having to in any way intellectually argue over its existence or its plausibility or its possibility. I wanted to get to the terrain before people start talking to me about maps, because I figured if the maps came in now, I'd lose the terrain, you know, and that was just a concern of mine.
Okay, yeah, that's really fascinating. I mean, when I had early spiritual awakening experiences myself, I very much went looking for a map, and I feel the map did lead me away from the terrain. And in some ways it helped me along the terrain, but there was definitely issues of it leading me away, whether that's the map itself or my interpretation of it, and I was ripe to be led away. I know, but I think that's a very wise insight to potentially stay away from maps for a while and just stick with the terrain.
Yeah, well, the primary map that I reckon I would have been given in a sort of materialist reductionist milieu was, that's just not happening.
Yeah.
That's brain chemistry right there, which you know, and only that, you know, more gravy than a grave in it, and so I just kind of wanted to, you know, have the time and space to really dig into it and get a taste of what was going on. Yeah.
So what does that journey look like then, post the experience, and it starts to subside at some point, and then at some point you become actively involved in a spiritual pursuit?
God, yeah. The next year in school, I seemed to get everything that I had egoically kind of wanted from before, and that was interesting, and that was probably good. I got to have everything that I wanted, and in some ways realized that, you know, what I thought would be the most delicious food in the world was sand, you know, ultimately, and empty. And so I really became a seeker at that time. Summer before high school, I wanted to get back to that space, because I knew at this point that it was kind of a space and it was a thing. And so at first I started, I thought that, you know, maybe exposing myself to danger would be the thing that would get me there. I didn't have any, I had read as a child many things about Buddhism and yogis and all that sort of stuff, and was fascinated, but I had never connected what I was experiencing with any of that at this point. It was not, there was just no connection between the two. And so I thought,
okay, I'm just a little surprised.
Yeah, it's weird. I even had you know, dreams and visions as a kid of being in these other places and other, you know, Himalayan places when I went to sleep, and all sorts of things, and a desire to be, you know, trained in some kind of Jedi temple meets monastery. But at some place down the road, I started associating maybe Buddhist things with just sort of hard discipline, maybe uninspired dead faces that aren't actually having a real experience. I figured maybe it just doesn't exist in the world anymore, and somehow it wasn't there. So, or maybe I was supposed to sort of do the weird, crazy experimental route that I did, which maybe fits my nature of sort of just wanting to jump into things. And I started jumping out of vehicles, you know, golf carts mainly, you know, because driven by, you know, seeing how fast can we get this up to 20, you know, okay, and
right,
jumping
that sounds
out,
dangerous. Yeah,
you know, or jumping off of like 10-foot retaining walls onto the beach below. I figured, you know, it was within reason. I figured, okay, this won't kill me. There's plenty of sand, but it's still going to scare me, and maybe it'll scare me enough to get me there. And I was lucky that I didn't break anything or even sprain anything. There was one close call with the golf cart, but you know, I would jump onto wet logs to cross streams just with reckless abandon. I was just trying to get myself. I was trying to get myself there, and then when that was getting a little bit too dangerous and not working, I decided, okay, I'm just going to be. What else scares me?
It didn't work, presumably. You didn't.
No, not really. It was funny, but I don't think it worked. Maybe it worked a little bit, but not enough for me to register. And then I started being completely honest with people and telling people the most embarrassing information I could come up with about myself to the person whom it would be the worst to tell. And that actually worked very well until I ran out of material. And then producing new embarrassing stuff just didn't have the same edge, it just didn't do it. And so I kind of kept going. And then one day by accident, I was just walking with my older sister around town, and she's 7 years older and was, very big in my upbringing. And then we walked by the local metaphysical store, and I had no interest in metaphysical bookstores. I'd never been in one yet, but all I saw were wind chimes and maybe incense and this sort of thing, and sometimes maybe people with a certain look coming out of it, and it just wasn't a draw for me at the time. But we went in, and I would go anywhere where my sister wanted to go, within reason. And she wanted to get some incense, and while she was in the front, I just kind of drifted to the back of the store, where the book section was, and I was just walking around, and I picked up a book at random, and it was on the meditation practices of yogis in Tibet. And I just opened a page at random, and I started reading about this sorts of space of consciousness and awareness, and just kept reading, and it just started to sound so similar to what I had touched. And that was it. I had to dig and find, what was happening here. And then that started to be connected. I spent the next 2-3 years, mainly most of high school, when I wasn't in school or when I wasn't with friends, wasn't at home, I would often be either at the metaphysical bookstore or at the public library across the street from the metaphysical bookstore, just reading through the New Age, the philosophy sections. Just I had kind of had a tacit deal with the owner that I could basically tacit deal. What does that mean? I could basically sit and read all the books that I wanted and not buy them, as long as I sort of bought an amulet, maybe a $20-$30 amulet every month and a half or so, something like that. That seemed to keep the peace, and I wasn't breaking any books or anything. But that was a wonderful period of life of searching, and I didn't have any meditation techniques and any practices, but I met wonderful, I would say sages, who came into town, and some clairvoyants and psychics who came into my hometown and really just befriended me. They were in their 50s, and here I was 14, 15, spring chicken, not a lot of background knowledge, but a lot of enthusiasm. And we were just, I felt that same presence in them, or at least, to a certain degree, felt that presence in them. And so I was just had to know, had to be in their presence and find out what was going on with them. And
did your sister share this journey with you at all? Was she just in the shop for the incense?
No, certainly wasn't. But we certainly shared a lot, and I think shared a lot of experiences, but we were in different places. She was often this was a period when she was off at university for much of the time on the East Coast, so very far away. And I would say that those events of our mom dying definitely hit us in different ways. And she had a wonderful set of friends that were a little bit outside of town as well. And I didn't always get in onto that circle for whatever reason. I was just 7 years younger. And so I think we definitely were biting the same fruit, but from very different ways and with very different sort of availability to do it. Yeah. But we certainly had a lot of good tarot readings in her room at night, and all sorts of very interesting psychic effects that would go on between us. In some ways we were like twins, but separated by 7 years. So we had that sort of
right. And so what came of all this metaphysical research and meeting the sages? Did you start to gravitate down one path more than others, or pick up a practice at some point?
I was searching for a practice at first from some of these books. Maybe I probably didn't read some of the right books. Some of them made enlightenment sound so difficult and so seemingly impossible that I figured, if this is even possible for anybody, surely these sorts of things aren't really attainable by me. That everything I've experienced at this time must be some sort of accident, and who knows if I'll ever be able to get back to it.
I remember that sense when we start talking about like 10,000 lifetimes over how many countless aeons.
Yes, exactly. I was really sort of frustrated about that. It's like, well, shit, maybe I could start the next life and try to have as much fun as I can in this one. And so I eventually kind of was in a place where I was kind of having sort of mystical experiences, but not having a great deal of fundamental, shifting into something deeper than the individualized self. That when a book would tell me, and then you will have no self, and that would just confuse the hell out of me. I'm like, okay, if enlightenment is I'm no longer exist, then who the hell is around to experience enlightenment? Like, what the hell does that mean? That's just would not fit inside my tiny brain. And so let's see. No teaching came. I was also a little bit hesitant about meditation. Actually, I was afraid to start a path because I knew that if I was the type of person that if I would commit to a path, if I would find a practice, I would have to go 100 or 200%. I had this sense that if I open that door, there's no going back. And so I was very hesitant about going down that route. I felt, there's still a chance for me to be whatever the hell a normal person is, having whatever kind of successful life that, I and certainly everybody else think I ought to have, even with my best interest in mind. I'll just, keep my grades high enough to get into some kind of good university or college and make sure that I have all of those options open and have a remunerative career. And then, if, and meditate, an hour a day or something like that, or go to these metaphysical gatherings or meet with whoever I can find to meet with. And that'll be the life, that'll be good enough. And I was kind of trying to create an internal compromise between, because this motivation, this sort of, I put it in quotes, monk motivation, monkish sort of streak was just rising. And I had no idea what to do with that. I had never wanted to be a monk in the sense of, austerity and giving up life. And I loved life. And I would think, why the hell do I want to be a monk? What are these feelings that are coming up in me? What the hell? I started dreaming of running away from school and hitchhiking and getting my way to the Himalayas. It's like, no, that's not a good thing to want, buddy. Keep it together. And just eventually I came upon this book, which is kind of maybe not the greatest book in the world, called the Lost Teachings of Atlantis and the Children of the Law of One or something. And I saw the name John Peniel on the side of it. And I thought, oh, this is like what Edgar Cayce was talking about. Maybe without thinking that this person could have read the same Edgar Cayce book and just simply used the name on the book. I didn't have, I was sometimes naive in that I didn't think someone would perpetuate such a lie as that,
no.
And so I thought, okay, who would lie that much? This must be real, And so I read this book religiously because I figured this is the thing, this will be my ticket. And eventually I started doing all the meditations from the book. And which was hard because I had no real person-to-person training, and I made all of the mistakes that one probably could make in doing meditation the wrong way. But eventually, I was 17. I just had the sense that I need to do this. I need to even prove to myself. I need to feel whole. I need to express this thing fully. So I started doing 4 to 6 hours of meditation a day from this book.
So what kind of meditations does one find in a Lost Teachings?
Oh, it seemed to be a bit of a potpourri, really. Now with knowledge after the fact, more knowledge, I could say that they're mixing bits of Vipassana, Buddhist visualization techniques, more Tibetan, breathing practice, simple breathing practices, counting meditation, this very strange meditation, which is some sort of maybe exotic Qigong thing called the star exercise, which involves hyperventilating, cold showers in the morning, waking up at 3 in the morning or 3 or 4 in the morning to catch those nice vata vibes, as it were. Yeah. Kind of a big mix of a whole lot of things. and you know, supposed to be scheduled at different parts of the day. So I figured, okay, well, you know, it's what I've got. I'm going to try this out. And there was an exercise where you sit in a darkened room and you look at a mirror with a candle in front of it, and you look at only the reflection of your right eye, which is like the left. And actually a lot of strange things happened out of that particular sort of thing. But I did this thing religiously. You know, I had no social life. You know, I streamlined everything. I let the zealot out of the cage.
There was a lot of, I was going to say dedication, you could say zealotry, for a 17-year-old to be getting up at 3 a.m. and even do, you know, dark room mirror gazing. And that can be a very deep process as well. Like from what I hear,
yes,
you know, the mirror gazing in the dark, and any mirror gazing, the psyche can become reflected in all sorts of ways. So quite a lot for a 17-year-old to go through.
Well, I had to do it. You know, there's a sense that I have to do this. You know, if I don't do this, you know, deep sense that this is it. This is along the North Star. I've got to follow the North Star, even if it's inconvenient. And there was it wasn't a should coming from some other region. It was very much in my heart. You know, I wanted to be in line with this and give it a try. And I became a vegetarian, then I became a vegan, then I attempted to become a fruitarian. That seemed to be going well. So then I thought, whoa, let's just try to become a breatharian. And that just found me getting rather thin.
Yeah.
I would do these 7-day fasts, and, you know, I would run 8 miles a day. And then when it wasn't difficult, I thought, why don't I just put a bunch of rocks in my backpack and run up the highest hill in town on no food?
Well, no food. Yeah, breatharian, just for anyone who doesn't know in the audience, anyone who's sane enough to avoid the whole thing, is living off the chi, the prana, the life alone, right? No food. I think you have water, don't you?
Yeah, I think so. Well, I was doing water. Yeah. But then I tried to stop water.
Okay,
I certainly felt a great deal of euphoria in those days. All that meditation, summer in beautiful Wisconsin. I'm, you know, fasting a lot. I have a pretty clean diet when I'm actually eating. You know, it seemed to be supporting me, the vegetarianism. I seemed to be able to keep a weight and be healthy and all that sort of thing. But it was maybe one of the extreme parts of the time period. Yeah. I lost a lot of weight.
I have read a book once by a fellow who claimed he was permanently breatharian, and he went years without food or water, just occasional cup of coffee for his enjoyment. It was a very convincing book, so I'll have to Google him and see if he's...
I thought I might be getting somewhere. I honestly thought I might be getting somewhere at the time, because I would feel this interesting, you know, and another one of those energies I felt as a child, usually when I would go to bed, but would feel this sort of energy, sometimes entering the middle of my feet, the balls of my feet, coming up my legs, you know, filling up my body and feeling very vivified by that. And I would be in meditation and find myself sort of not breathing, but not in a bad way. You know, I felt completely fine. And so I felt, okay, maybe I'm starting to tap into this secret prana or chi. But, you know, if I was, it certainly wasn't consistently enough to maintain.
Sure, but it's a very exciting time, isn't it, when you discover the esoteric bookshop for anyone and get into all these things. And there's no reason why breatharianism should be any more or less credible than Atlantis, or more or less credible than being one with the universe or astral projection. So it's not really clear what's credible and what's not, or what's good to go into and what's not at that time. It's a very exciting time of experimentation, that whole thing, for anyone.
Yes, absolutely.
So how did that progress then, and what emerged from all this experimentation, going very deeply into different things?
I was well, one, a lot of my older metaphysically inclined friends had left town, and I was really bummed about that, because I so enjoyed their company. And so I thought, well, I shouldn't complain. I'll just create a metaphysical society and then gather whoever's in the area to one place, and then I'll have metaphysically inclined friends So my sister and I founded a Lake Geneva Metaphysical Society, put posters up around town, invited people. One of the people that we invited had, a year before, I would say, talked to me about this thing called Ascension. And I thought he was referring to sort of ascended masters and the kind of the websites I would find on the internet talking about El Moria and people of that state. And I did the 16-year-old thing of to be cool, pretending to know what the hell he was talking about, and I didn't. And so a year after that, a year and a half after that, when we do the Metaphysical Society, we invite him. We've got to invite Josiah. We've got to do that. He's got to come to the meeting, and we did. And I think it was him who I mean, he brought a lot of things into my life, into both of our lives. He ended up being my sister's first husband, a couple years, a year maybe down the road, not too long down the road. But he lent me, first of all, he lent me the book Autobiography of a Yogi, or gave me a copy. And for some reason, I hadn't encountered that book yet. Being in the book section there. But when I read it, it was like it is for a lot of people. Really, revelatory. It was every page. It was as if I was being smacked with love. Reading this account of Yogananda's life, and this was in my senior year of high school. I would read any chance I would get some downtime from homework, or when I wasn't doing the meditations, and just reading the book, just kind of getting exposure to this whole other strata or dimension of spirituality was a huge opening for me, and opened up my meditations in ways that seemed to be beyond the techniques themselves. There was this, I would find myself kind of filled with love for 20, 30 minutes at a time, just sitting there as if my body was weightless and floating in these very similar spaces to what Yogananda was talking about. And feeling light, and feeling the top of my head, and feeling as if my awareness was bursting out the top of my head, and that actual light was just flowing in and fountaining down upon me.
And that's just from reading the book.
Yes, it was very strange. Just from reading the book, it paired with all the meditation I suppose I'd been doing correctly or incorrectly up to that point. And he mentioned in the book somewhere that whoever prays to Babaji, I promise you, he will. If you invoke Babaji's name, he will. His blessings will shower upon you. And I thought, that's a pretty tall order, Yogananda, but I'm gonna take you up on this. Just hedge my bets here, because I felt very much drawn to this figure that he was describing, and I did that. And when I felt I would get to the sort of maybe deepest part of my meditations at night, I would send up my actual desires or prayers, and at that time it was I'm not going to end up with these Children of the Law of One folks in Colorado, because it does seem that they're maybe a little bit off, and it's not for me. So I need to, please show me where I need to go. Please help guide my path. If I need to be in university and just do some meditation, that's great. If there's a monastery out there for me, which is what I was really searching for consciously, anything that you can do synchronicitously to guide me there, that would be great. That would be wonderful. And it seemed, as soon as I started doing that, it seemed to open up something inside me. Maybe the awareness, I started to feel as if I was getting, little messages of intelligence coming into the top of my head, little balls of light that would come in and then just sort of have to be a little bit unpacked over a day or two to see what was in there. And this, I felt, led me to actually learning this ascension practice and inviting Josiah to inviting him to our metaphysical society, starting my metaphysical society. Yeah.
Okay, so Josiah was into Ascension, and Josiah gave you the book by Yogananda.
Yes, that's right.
So
that's right. Yeah.
Talk about Ascension then. Is there a connection to Yogananda in the
no, not really. But I mean, I think maybe only in the sense of a very broad connection, that anything that seems to be effective in leading people back to the stillness is connected. But there's no outside.
So just let me re-ask then. Just tell me what is this Ascension meditation?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, this Ascension meditation was for me the easiest meditation I'd ever done. All the meditations prior to it for me had involved some kind of efforting. Even in their structures, there was effort was a good thing, or seen as something that's helpful. Developing concentration, there was a sense of needing to chain the mind to a certain degree, so that one could once the noise had subsided through force, one would be able to pick up on this other element, which was sometimes few and far between. Ascension was a big change for me in that, like, I suppose very much like TM and like probably a range of other meditation practices, it was doing the complete opposite. It was allowing thoughts to be there. It wasn't even, it's even simpler than just observe your thoughts, or be the observer, that's work in some sense, or hold your thoughts in a certain way, or that can be a little bit work. Ascension I was very skeptical of it at first. And in fact, I continued to be. I saw that Josiah, who later was named Darshan, I saw that he had something when we were meditating together. It was clear, it was palpable that something in his experience was solid, was that there was something going on. So I thought, okay, maybe it works for him, but it sounds awful, appreciation, gratitude, love, what is that? You talk about that and talk about these ascension attitudes, and even the name of the technique, to my mind, sounded, that doesn't sound appealing at all. And there was a lot of talk of, if you do this practice, you will have stress release, and for some reason, stress release just was not particularly inspiring to my heart and mind as an outcome for meditative practice. I didn't put together that stress release ultimately equals enlightenment when it's all gone. Or
sure, I get that you could, you perhaps were looking for something a bit more grand than. Yes,
and if I'm explaining it in too much of a circuitous way, I apologize. Sometimes that's how I get around to things, into explanations of practice. But yeah.
So far, the description I have of Ascension, it sounds a bit like a Louise Hay "You Can Heal Your Life" book.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's certainly not like that. Yeah,
it's not like that. So how is it distinct then? What does
good
the
question.
look like?
Well, essentially, it's like TM. It's sort of a mantra-based technique. Only you're not just using bija mantras or Sanskrit mantras. You are using short phrases that are in the first language, or in your first language. So English for us. There are Sanskrit elements which are involved in this process. Appreciation, gratitude, and love are sort of weaved into these techniques. But there's no need to feel any of this sort of thing. One's not attempting to feel good or to cultivate some kind of a feeling of appreciation, gratitude, love, or any feeling whatsoever, which was very nice. There's no sort of mood creating at all. The idea, the idea behind how these work is that they're part of a class of thoughts that just seem to be naturally pleasing to the mind, that have the tendency of moving the mind inward as opposed to outward and horizontally and thinking about things, which is kind of the understanding of TM, is that there are certain techniques or certain vehicles, as they call the mantras, that have the tendency of attracting the mind back inward towards the source. That's how the idea is presented.
Okay, so can you give an example of what a mantra might be, if it's a repetition of something based around a theme of love or gratitude? Is that?
No, I mean, I can't really give examples. They're just short sentences that are same for every single person, that have a bit of appreciation in them, have an element that is supposed to be pleasing to the conceptual mind, and then have a focus. They're kind of short little statements that are very specific, and that are rather quite unique, actually. I thought, I would find them in literature or elsewhere, even in prayer traditions, but I haven't really at this point yet found them in that way, which is kind of strange. But giving them out is only done in courses, just like
Okay.
the Transcendental Meditation.
Yeah. So, like, I suppose I've never explored mantra meditation all that much. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm more in that place of recognizing the separation between the observer and the observed and this kind of thing. So when I mentioned Louise Hay, I suppose when people start talking about love and gratitude, that's where my mind kind of gravitates. So I'm thinking, like, you're talking about the mantra then being a kind of deep, enacting a process of deepening one's consciousness, sounds like. So that's the, because you expressed that you were cynical to start with. And then your experience was that did it take you into that kind of transcendent place that you touched upon and gone into?
Well, it's the conscious experience will be different for other people. I like to give that caveat, but for me, it was 0 to super duper samadhi in less than 60 seconds. That was what surprised me.
Okay,
I go into this class. I'm sitting down in the chair. I see the teachers write these phrases on the whiteboard. I'm thinking, that's it. I was being polite, so I didn't say it out loud. They're giving me sort of the instructions on how to use it. They tell me, and you can even actively disbelieve that this is going to work, and it will still work. And I did say, yeah, that's good, because that's kind of where I was. And then I start thinking them, and there's no forcing, which took a little bit of getting used to for me, because I was very much used to concentrating my mind. I think these short sentences with my eyes closed. I'm in between thinking the techniques. I'm thinking, this is just going to be a bunch of crap, And then all of a sudden, I find my body is more relaxed than it has been, and I couldn't remember when it was that relaxed. And that was interesting, even while thought is happening, even while I'm every now and then when I notice that I'm thinking, I'm then sort of reintroducing these techniques. Here's my body relaxed. And then all of a sudden I noticed this, it was as if the stillness, reached up out of the depths, and that was, that was incredible. And that persisted for me throughout much of the weekend. And that was the space I was before, which was, to me, was, oh my God, this is what I've been searching for all these years. That space. And so I thought, my mind didn't understand. My mind was going like, well, how the hell you're adding some thoughts to the mix, and they seem to be, I could palpably feel them as it were, pulling my mind down into this stillness, attracting them, and even feeling those mantric thoughts emerging out of that still dimension, like, oh, and kind of having that interplay, and that, I decided, well, maybe I've this might be some sort of thing like a workshop high, maybe it was a contact high, or, I should give this some more time to see, if this is just some sort of honeymoon phase, if this is going to consistently do this in my day-to-day life over time. And, it did. So it was very powerful.
So you're still quite young at this point, right, when you're getting into this?
Yeah, I was 18.
Okay. And has this been your sort of the bedrock of your spiritual practice ever since?
Yeah.
Great. The question I'd like to ask, and I appreciate this is a difficult question for me to answer, for anyone to answer, but it's something that's almost archetypal, I find, in spiritual journeys, is people will say, I got into this thing and I applied myself to it at 110%, and it was hard, it was arduous, I did it for X number of years, and then I started to question it and thought, well, why am I doing this? There's a bit of a contradiction here. Like, I'm trying really, really hard to lose the self, but who's then trying? Because if I'm trying hard to, these kind of contradictions come up, and then people will get in touch with a book or a teaching, or something will arise internally that makes them think, hang on, have I been looking at this whole thing wrong? And then, I found this much easier way of doing it.
Yeah.
And then we have to look back and evaluate the period of our life prior to that. And we're left with the question of, so, gee, was that all a waste of time? Was that just my silly phase where I was being a bit of a blockhead? And it was just all that was about was losing it, was getting over the idea I needed to have this arduous path to get into this right way, this more relaxed, more free-flowing way. Or did that arduous phase in some ways provide a bedrock? Okay. Now, I just wonder what your reflections are on that from the previous stages prior to Ascension.
Yeah.
Do you feel that you could have gone straight into Ascension as a 16, 17-year-old when you first walked into the metaphysical bookshop? Or do you feel that that period played a role?
Yeah, certainly this thought has crossed the mind before. And I think things needed to happen just the way they did. I mean, yeah. From my perspective now, all the events of my life, on a timeline, they're kind of felt from kind of a, you can feel the timeless dimension just pushing up through each and every single one of them. So there's a sense of, from that perspective, there's a sense of, that is just sort of the flower, or the mushroom that the eternal timeless mycelium wanted to push out at the time. You need to chase girls here. You need to jump out of a golf cart here. You need to,
sure.
It's from that sort of sense. It makes sense to me the most from that perspective.
Well, let me ask you a different way. Then, do you see other people coming directly into this, what feels like a very soft, gentle form of meditation, this Ascension meditation, and experiencing the kind of deep effects that you're describing in yourself?
Yeah, it depends on the person. I'm certainly never a one size fits all sort of person. It's very much different strokes for different folks, and even at different times in somebody's life, they're going to be able to connect with perhaps one thing better than another. And so some people certainly are very much, this is it. They've arrived, and this is, you can very much tell, this is very dharmic for them. They're going to be doing this for a while, or for as long as it's useful to them. Other people maybe are learning out of a curiosity, and it's going to be one experience, hopefully on their way to something better or more fitting, or something like that. So it's definitely a mixed bag from my experience. Yeah. Okay.
So I sort of cut you short in your biography, but you're still young when you get into the Ascension practice. So I guess you've had, I don't know how old you are exactly, but it's got to be, if not half a lifetime now of doing Ascension.
It's almost. Yeah.
So
yeah. Almost.
What's that been like, living under the influence of this practice, which you really connect with and takes you into this deep space? How did life play out after getting into it, under the influence of it?
Well, the first half was, there's kind of magic all the way around, and it sort of split very quickly, very shortly after learning. It must have been 3 months. I found myself moving from Wisconsin to the Pacific Northwest of the United States, and where I was in Seattle, I was basically geographically in the middle of two different sort of teaching centers / monastery devoted to this practice, doing longer courses and retreats and that sort of thing. And I had a sense that I wanted to go to one of these, and I felt a connection to a center in Oregon. So I ended up giving them a call. I actually called them a few months before, very persistent, trying to see if they had any spaces available for people like me to work out an arrangement where I could live there and be in an immersive environment and meditate with people who've been doing it for a while, and so on and so forth. And so I was invited to come down for an interview to the center in Oregon, and it was, in some ways very intimidating, because here was a big group of people, many of which I could tell were just seeing right through me, and were feeling me from the inside, without trying to, not in an invasive way, just their presence. And so and you know, it was a bit of a rough beginning for me, but in terms of my own insecurities and neuroses that were just all really very, you know, there was so much light being shown that a lot of my shadows were just so damned apparent that I was, oh God, I felt like a bit of a walking shadow. And I just said, okay, you know, this is how it is. No need to be too embarrassed. And so I had a long period of time, 6.5 years, in which I lived in sort of the, in this community, whether it be in Oregon in a larger center with other people, or whether it was in little satellite centers in Helsinki or Hong Kong or Michigan. And I went through a course, a very long course, which is very important for me, in which I spent five months doing the practice basically all day, which is a teacher training course. To be a teacher, you have to go and do this course, and then afterwards you go and teach the practice if that is what you're inclined to do. So that was a very profound experience for me. I was able to pay for the course with a long work exchange program, which was very, very cool for me as well, because that was another thing that there were precognitive experience of before getting to that. And you cut me off or redirect me whenever you need to. Because
Thomas, I just feel it's maybe a bit remiss of me. I've not asked you the origins of Ascension. Is this a meditation that's going back 100 years or more, or is it a relatively modern form?
Yeah. The origins are it's, for some people, a kind of a problematic sort of thing, because it could just be as young as, you know, 1989 or 1990 or 1991, for all I know. I never met the founder of it. He passed away in 1997. I learned in 2002. So I did most of my learning, as it were, with his students, his Krapa students and their students. His claim in his books was that this is something really old, you know, from the Himalayas, and Jesus, whom we're going to use the name Isha, and Isha is involved in this too, in his lost years in India. And while he was always pretty quick to say, you really don't have to believe this at all, you know, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where it came from for you. All that matters is, you know, you're basically going to try it out as something of a experimentalist and see if it changes your life or not, and have that be it. But at the same time, he put it out there. And so that's his origin story for Ascension, was that it's this ancient practice from the Himalayas, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
And how do you relate to those kind of stories yourself? Because we've probably all been involved at some point in a form of spirituality that we've bought into, and then became suspicious of the origin story, and then thought, oh, how do I reconcile all the goodness I found in this with that? I've no idea what that's. So for me, like, for instance, I was involved in Reiki.
Yeah.
And then I came to believe that Reiki is more of a Californian healing art than a Japanese one.
Oh no. I'll have to travel up north, the gravesite somewhere, not too far from me. Well, actually, I never had too much of a problem from it, because I didn't go into it with having any sort of origin story be at all important for my experience.
Sure.
So it was a little bit problematic, because when I see a picture of Jesus, I'm going like, oh my God, the weekend was going so well, and now this, because you know, I mean, I wasn't born yesterday, so I you know, I was raised to be a critical thinker, and I was like, oh my God, here we go. So, and I kind of persisted this in spite of, for me, what might be sort of problematic backstories. It wasn't a big negative push for me. I'm a pretty open guy to everything, but I think my whole life I've always I like maps, but I like the terrain even better. So I'm always interested in tasting as deeply of the terrain for myself as best I can, and then making decisions from there. And that's what I did with this. I tried to approach it as best as I could as some sort of subjective spiritual scientist doing an experiment with these techniques, and seeing if anything, any spectacular changes or any sort of profound changes that I couldn't see coming from anything else happened, and or if I tuned into, if I was really resonating with it from my heart, you know, if it was really there for me. And those were kind of my criteria. going in to learn, and in really a fairly innocent sort of manner, just trying it out and seeing what's going to happen. And so, you know, it used to be kind of embarrassing for me to have to tell people, because I basically, I wanted people to, like intelligent people especially, I wanted it to be accessible by intelligent people and not turn people off, because there's a you know, rather wild and tall tale of a backstory. But yeah.
Okay, so during this period that you're doing it very intensely, then I suppose it's a kind of classic thing on a spiritual journey that people go through a phase of a kind of clearance of everything that's built up in the psyche and a resulting transformation in character.
Yes.
Was that your experience?
Good Lord. Yes. that there were some interesting times, especially when I was working in our monk run cafe to pay for my training. It was sometimes a crucible for me. It was pleasant, but man, did my shit come up. I hope I can say that on your program.
You can, yeah.
As a child, opposite from maybe what most boys are programmed for, I was allowed to feel sad, but I basically learned that I needed to repress my anger. You know, right. I really sort of learned that I'm bigger than other people, and I'm more intelligent, and it's my responsibility to be the one who doesn't get angry and keeps a cool head, you know, and tries to, you know, bring other people into, you know, reason or something like that. So I had a lot of anger that I had no idea really about. And, you know, there was one month where it was just rage, just rage, just coming up, you know, some lid had been taken off, and just all the time. And then it passed. And, you know, there was jealousy. Jealousy was another emotion that my whole life I had tried to avoid like the plague. You know, I would very predictably get into situations that would bring it up. I would even be aware that this was going to happen, but there was nothing I could do to stop the feeling from, you know, taking charge of my nervous system. And so when you know, that this time of practice with Ascension definitely brought jealousy up as an emotion as well. And you know, all the cupboards that had been closed off and locked away, you know, one by one or two by two, or many at the same time, were just being opened, and, you know, having stuff sort of sweat off more or less. But permanently, mainly. I mean, that wasn't ever really the focus. The focus was just to do the practice, the meditation practice. And once you start to sort of enjoy, you know, recognize the silence that it takes you to rest into that. And, you know, these other things coming off were more or less kind of a wonderful byproduct. So definitely a period of sweating.
Were you in the community when this was happening? Was there a kind of a supportive community element to that?
Yes. Oh, yes. I was very lucky. I was very fortunate, because I was in a community that allowed me to be able to express, you know, whatever I needed to, and without people really taking it on personally. It was quite amazing, actually, how impersonal, you know, I would say something directly to somebody, you know, and it would just flow off of them like they're made out of Teflon. And that was beautiful to be able to, and then in turn to be that person for somebody else, you know, to have somebody just vomit on me, but not take it personally. And then, you know, just feel the weightlessness that comes after it's cleared away, and the silence that builds up after there's more space for it. It was an incredible blessing to have all those people be there for me in that way. Yeah.
And at some point you've ended up in Japan doing this. You've at some point left the community, obviously.
I did. Yeah.
What direction did life take then, and how did Japan come on the horizon?
Oh, Japan is very recent. That's a very recent development. Right. I've been most of the time in the United States in the Pacific Northwest, or up in Canada for a year in Vancouver. But otherwise, I remained in Oregon for most of the time. I left the community in 2008 for a variety of reasons. I wanted to spend some more time with my family. I kept getting this itch to go to university coming up, and And I had some, I had some issues with how things were being run, or a little bit of too much groupthink for my taste. Was starting to happen, for instance. And years before I had sort of made a deal with myself, I had basically told myself that if I ever find myself as something of a malcontent, if I ever am consistently getting caught in things that I can't just immediately let go and, let off, then that would be a time when I might consider, making a change. I had really sort of wanted to sort of remain in my organization for the rest of life. But I don't think I can hear you, actually.
No, it's okay. I just muted because I knew I was going to sneeze.
Oh, that's so considerate of you. I saw the sneeze and I thought, wow, this man's incredible. Yeah, this man's incredible. Yeah. So yeah, it was time for me to go. I think in some ways, I found myself a year before I left, I started having those thoughts come up from the silence, which were basically like, you should really get yourself fired. You should get yourself kicked out. And I knew it wasn't the voice of the ego. This was to me, this was definitely the voice of consciousness.
Right.
Pushing me along.
Did it happen that way? Were you like fired and kicked out, or was it more smooth than that?
No, I kind of had to kick myself out in this sort of sense. It was a little bit rough, but I kind of pushed myself out the door, more or less. It was time to do that. It probably would have been better if I went about a year sooner. I stayed.
Okay.
When I started to get that impulse, it was just, that's so inconvenient. Why are you telling me that right now? No, I want to stay. Why?
Well, sure. It's also quite an archetypal thing that people who go into spiritual communities enter into this loving, all-embracing, everything's wonderful. There's a sense that nothing could ever go wrong and I'll be here forever. And then it all ends in chaos. I'm not saying that was your experience, but it's very typical of spiritual communities, because so much stuff gets brought up by them that the group then, and everyone's reflecting each other's shadows, and there's all sorts of questions of group dynamics and how we live together, and almost an assumption that this will all work out because we're spiritual people. A lot of people I speak to, and indeed my own experience to some extent, is that spiritual groups are very, very difficult.
Yeah, I think I probably needed to get out of the institution. I needed to be out in the world. One thing that I noticed when I was teaching was that, here I was in my own private sort of Shangri-La, enjoying, the presence of individuals who I would call enlightened, at various stages. And yet I started to notice that at first, even very subtly, there was a sense of this insularity forming of a monkish world and an everybody else world. Right. And I didn't like that at all. If I felt that was sort of affecting anything that I was speaking or was playing there, I would feel like I need to go and take a shower with steel wool or something, because I didn't like that. And yet it was growing. And I think actually feeling that sense, I didn't know it at the time, but that was definitely contributing to this movement to sort of push myself out into the world and get out there and put myself into a position where holding such a distinction would be much more difficult.
Okay.
So I didn't consciously see that was happening at the time, but just even a couple of years later, it was pretty obvious that.
Okay. Did you end up going to university, as you mentioned?
I did. Yeah, I went. I moved from the Oregon coast to Portland, not very far, where my sister was, and wanted to spend time with her before she went off, maybe to South Korea or some other place, and started in university, and I actually thought that I would start at the university in Portland, kind of give myself a couple terms of sort of practice because I figured, I must be so out of, institutionalized educational shape at this point. I'd better give myself training wheels. And then I just ended up being there for the rest of my time in university and stayed in Portland. And
what were you studying?
Nothing fun. No, I ended up studying philosophy and economics and Chinese language.
Right.
Yeah, as my language option. So, but I studied a great deal of things, and actually, leaving was hard for me. Leaving was leaving the organization was very hard. It was a difficult landing to make, to
Sure,
go from
I bet,
this
yeah.
environment to, I would watch people and I would feel like, why the fuck are you in my mind is like, why are you following those thoughts? Don't follow your thoughts. You should be meditating right now. Or, I was just I was a little bit aghast. I mean, I wasn't naive, but the experience of being in such a different environment was a bit of a shock to my
Sure, yeah.
system.
Yeah, totally.
At the same point, I felt, I must have just left because I wasn't good enough. I wasn't cut out to be a monk. It must be my ego that's forced me out. I mean, I think people thought as much when I left
Yeah.
from within the organization. And so I felt, I'm second class here. I'm not good enough to, it was a hard time. And I also at that time was a little bit doubting of my experience, which at that time it was fairly consistent, but it wasn't stable yet. The experience of silence, I felt maybe we've just made this all up. Maybe I've been deceiving myself into thinking that this is something different, when maybe it's just this, everybody is just doing the same thing, and there's no difference. There's nothing significant. And so the experimentalist in me kind of wanted to know, for sure, as best as I could. So I sort of decided to drop meditation.
Okay.
I dropped meditation. I dropped so many parts of my discipline. I just wanted to, and I wanted to sort of adopt, to my taste. I'm not a big partier or a drinker or anything like that. I wanted to adopt a normal, early 20-year-old person's life, whatever the hell that meant. And I got my answer after a few years. So that was good.
So it went, you kind of stepped out of the meditative thing for a whole few years.
I did. It was hard. It was really rough. It was much harder to try to push back against something once you've got it than before, when I didn't have it. It was suffering. It was very painful. It was like consciously attempting to wear a shoe, several sizes too small. And so in doing that and going against the grain to that degree, I really kind of realized that what I was doing was in fact, real and actual.
Yeah.
And
I think it's a valuable exercise for people who are on a kind of spiritual path to do at some point. Not necessarily to the extent of going partying for a few. That's a big one.
I didn't party. I'm not much of a party animal.
But particularly if there's like a gradual drip by drip change in a person that occurs over years, it is possible to not necessarily notice, or to think, well, am I that different to how I was when I was 17 before this whole thing started? I don't know. Maybe it's just growing older, right? Maybe I'd have gotten to growing older. And I remember consciously one thing I did was I heard it as a recommendation from the guru Punja. I think I'm saying his name sort of right.
Yeah.
To attempt to lose the sense of the I, as in the deep transcendent I, and allow yourself to become completely identified with thought, okay, as a way of experiencing what that I is. And I did this as an exercise, and it's like, oh, hello, I'm 17 again. This is what it was like. This is complete whirling thoughts. This is really chaotic and hellish and awful. And it's like, yeah, that's what this has done for me, this process of spiritualization. It's given me this deeper transcendent sense of self. And it's only when I consciously tried to lose it that I became aware of what I gained in that.
Yep, you described my experiment very eloquently. That was exactly what came of all that. It was just, oh my God, it was true. There was deep, profound transformation. This stillness, which I've been pushing away for 2 or 3 years. That's all I have to do is just relax back into that, and there we are. That was real. That was an actual thing. Yeah.
I was doing philosophy and economics a part of that, because that's going from a very spiritual environment to something that's very heady and intellectual. Like I quite enjoy reading and listening to economics podcasts, but it's really broad on the capacity for reasoning and rationalizing from first principle and this kind of thing. Very different in some respects to meditative process. So was that a part of it, of experiencing a different aspect of yourself then?
Yeah, I would say so. I think, I was a bull. I was looking after the color red, and the philosophy department seemed to bear it in spades as far as the kind of experience that seemed very different than what I was
Mm.
cultivating before. And so, it's this, Western style analytic philosophy. That's what's in most departments, not a lot of continental. And that was, whew, it was lovely for me to, I've always enjoyed those subjects. I think there's no real gulf between intellectual cultivation and samadhi.
Sure.
If you're only doing intellectual cultivation or only doing anything else, then that's your gulf. But certainly it is, the environment was 180 degrees in some ways than a monastic environment, as far as, people are just working out of that frontal lobe and working, playing with the concepts and not having no awareness that there's an ability to relax back into something more fundamental, or, consciousness as a thing itself. So, yeah. And especially most of the departments I was swimming in, the general undercurrent, philosophically, whatever department was certainly a reductionist materialism.
Yeah.
I mean, that for people, that just goes without saying, that's your entry card into respectability, is to be a reductionist materialist. And the scope of debate is so small that to get excited about somebody like Leibniz or Berkeley is something that marks you as odd or eccentric, much less to start talking, talking about mystics or your experiences at the monastery. That's so far out of the court. I had nobody to talk to about that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really disappointing, but an entirely accurate description of, academia.
Yeah.
So you got back into the more spiritual process at some point after these years of wandering out in the world.
Yeah.
And have been teaching?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it happened my last year in school. I was actually I was sort of waking up with what probably were panic attacks. In the middle of the night, my body was so stressed, and I just realized one night, as I was unable to breathe, that now's the time I can either step back into my purpose, my dharma, my life path in the silence, or I could die. And if I died, I've had a good life. I've accomplished a lot of what the significant movements that I'd wanted to accomplish. That'd be okay to just go to sleep one night and just leave your body. Or something. That was kind of a voice that came out from the heart, and I decided I'm going to go with I'm going to step back into the dharma and keep living this life. And so I made a choice, and things started to develop. I felt like a bit like some sort of middle-aged knight trying to put their old armor back on. They're a little bit too fat for it, and there's a little bit of I've lost a step here, okay. And doing the practice again, and I, not too long after that, I met my wife, who was definitely part of this re-emerging, reawakening, stepping back into my path, process, very quickly. And then I, graduated, got out of university, didn't exactly have an intention to start teaching again, mainly because I had left the community, and often when you leave the community, that means you're not supposed to teach anymore, and that sort of thing. And so I was always actually rather a bit of respectful rebel. There's a certain amount I've always had a certain amount of deference towards tradition, even though I also have the tendency to sort of see the flaws in institutions. But after a while, it was just obvious that it was time to start teaching again and working in that facility. And I have to say that when I came back to teaching and just living in general, it was so much deeper than when I was 23 or 24 and was a young monastic. The process of going to university and just really putting myself through a little bit of pain and suffering. I can't call it really pain and suffering at a certain level, getting a degree, but the process of moving away from the stillness and actively trying to avoid it in some ways was, when I came back to it, it was just so much deeper. And that dichotomy that I was trying to shake, that sense of having monkish people and everybody else over here that was very well undermined by going off and just making all the mistakes that I would judge other people for doing, to such an extent that it was very difficult to think of anybody as a fuck up, having been so thoroughly the fuck up myself.
Yeah.
It's just, okay, here we are. Yeah.
So how does it go now with what kind of impact do you see the Ascension meditation having when you teach people? Like, do you get people who are looking for spiritual enlightenment coming along, or people who are looking for more kind of sense of peace and tranquility and stress reduction in their own lives?
I tend to get people who are very much looking for spiritual enlightenment. I think different people attract or connect with different sorts of people. I often run into a lot of people who have been meditating maybe 40, 45 years and have been in some capacity teaching meditation or some other spiritual modality themselves. I've gotten people who I would say are realized, in a sense that they have this samadhi going all the time and they haven't moved from it, but there's for whatever reason we connect, and they feel like, even though I'm here, I want to do this thing. And so I get to watch people with that sort of nervous system kind of blossom in interesting in ways that they weren't quite expecting, which is always beautiful to watch. And then I get a lot of people who are very innocent, a lot of innocent people who aren't looking for stress release or enlightenment or anything, but just kind of have it in their heart, like, oh, I want to do this thing, for maybe no particular reason, but I just feel drawn to it. And so those are the sort of people I very regularly run into for classes. Yeah.
So where could people, I'll direct people to your website, but where could people find out a bit about this? Because I've tried to go into understanding it to a degree in the interview, and I'm still left feeling like,
oh no,
do I get this? So I suppose not having strong experiences of mantra meditation myself, it's a curious mystery in what you've presented to me, in that you're describing these shifts and transformations in consciousness. And I'm thinking, gee, how does that technique Thomas is describing lead to that shift? So where can people find out a bit more about this?
Let me answer that in two parts. One, I might just give an example. I'll just use the mantra Om. Everybody's familiar with Om. Maybe people use it in a very sort of chanting sort of way. But if we were to use it in sort of the Bija mantra style, we would just think Om very simply as we were thinking the word Coca-Cola. Nothing attached to it, very mechanical in that sort of sense. Only in this mantra practice, for those who really enjoy it, for those perhaps who are disposed for it spiritually, that sort of practice, the thinking of the Om has a tendency of either very quickly or sometimes, it's felt gradually, of moving them from a very choppy surface of the mind where things are really moving and coming and going to more and more and more dropping down to this sort of quieter, calmer, more profound space. They still may have the surface going on up here, but now there's a real sort of separation between the movements, the objects of consciousness and consciousness itself. Mm-hmm. And that's the goal of Ascension, or of all of these mantra meditations. And for people for whom it's successful, that's kind of the general experiences. Sometimes the meditation might be very thoughty, and there's no attempt to try to sort of control that or stop that process. Sometimes it's a seemingly very busy mind, and there's nothing wrong with that. We just sort of use the mantra very gently, without any attempt to sort of displace anything or create a different condition. Just throw it in like you're throwing a pebble in a swiftly moving river. And those are perfectly wonderful meditations, because people often find when their eyes are open that, oh my God, there is still the stillness, even though my mind is moving quite quickly. And sometimes the meditation experience is very silent and profound, and it's very obvious that there's there's no movement of consciousness, and we find ourselves in samadhi, and everyone's, who reads certain books is going for that one, and they're both equally valid. I would say equally valid to the practice. To get more specific information about, say, Ascension, typing in the search words Ishaya's Ascension will pull up quite a few websites, and because there are now many sort of individual teachers like myself, and organizations that are collectives of teachers teaching it with their own websites. Some websites more helpful than others. There are a couple juicy, dirty laundry websites, which I've always enjoyed.
I'll direct people to your website, because I think it's like there's very good descriptions on there. That last explanation with the Om, that's sort of made the penny drop for me. So okay. I feel like I know where you're coming from now, and what's like I'm in the ballpark anyway for
good.
Yeah. So maybe we'll start to bring things to a close for this one. Is there anything else you'd like to? Okay.
I'm trying to think of it. You're a wonderful interviewer, I think. It's good. But let's see. No, I can't think of anything. Yeah.
Great. That's been a fantastic chat. I'd love to have you back on at some point. On the one hand, I think there's more we could go into around the whole non-dual themes and consciousness and all that. And I'm aware that you have another life altogether as an astrologer of some sort of life, which is just way too much to take on in this interview.
For some people, that would go into my personal dirty laundry section.
No, well, everything, all sorts of arcane practices are respectable on this podcast.
Oh yeah, I know. Yeah,
nothing too far out. Astrology.
I have a big range of friends, from reductionist materialists to people who consort with angels to maybe hyper non-dualists, or I'm not quite sure they're having a non-dual experience necessarily, but they're very rigid in their philosophical outlook, and to the point that something like astrology would be as equally displeasing to them as it would be.
The dualists are worse than the reductionist materialists, or as bad as I find for this kind of thing. And I think there's an awareness in non-dualists that they're already into something a bit weird, like they've already got the disapproval of the reductionist materialists. So
one hopes
throw anyone under the bus who's doing anything that might be a bit far out. Like astrologers are the first ones to go under.
Typically, yeah. I've always been attracted to things that would get me thrown under the bus.
Yes.
So that's definitely been a feature of life, that you just can't stay away from that cookie jar that'll get you a little bit exiled. Yeah.
I've always been attracted to the people who attract the scorn of respectable society.
Well, then we're made to be really good friends in that case. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think we've mentioned that we won't go into this, but we both have a liking of the philosopher Paul Feyerabend, who is always on hand to defend the disreputable elements in society. And that's, I'm always intrigued by, I can understand on the surface of it. It does seem like a funny idea that objects billions of light years away would be affecting life on Earth. But what's really going on there? Let's look a bit deeper at this, and why are people into this? And so, all sorts of things like that. Love to explore them. So
yeah.
Okay, but for now, we'll draw this one to a close. So thank you very much for being on today. I'll link to all your details below, and the course. You do work online, don't you? For astrology mainly, I do the work online. For Ascension, I do the work in person, but I also teach mantric meditation online. Okay, so all those details will be below on whatever platform we're looking on. Thomas, thank you very much for today. We'll speak again sometime.
All right, thank you, Richard.